The House of Shadows. The California coast had never felt so cold, even in September. Damian Cross stood on the stone terrace of his estate, watching fog roll across the vineyard rows like a shroud. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days since the accident. He'd stopped counting weeks ago, but the numbers still lived in his chest, heavy as anchors. His wife, Claire, had loved this view. She'd stand here with her morning coffee, planning which vines to prune, which barrels to blend, her laughter carrying across the valley. Now the vineyard ran itself through managers and automated systems. Damian couldn't bear to walk those paths anymore, where every stone and stake whispered her name. The house behind him sprawled across 5 acres, 12 bedrooms, most of which he'd never enter. The east wing remained exactly as Claire had left it. Her studio with half-finished paintings, her closet still holding the scent of jasmine perfume, her reading glasses folded on the bedside table. His friends called it unhealthy. His therapist suggested it was time to let go. But Damian had fired the therapist 6 months ago. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel and turned to see his estate manager's car pulling up the circular drive. Gerald had been insistent about this new hire. The previous housekeeper had quit after 2 months. Unable to handle Damian's moods and the oppressive silence that filled every room. "Mr. Cross," Gerald called out, climbing the terrace steps with his usual diplomatic smile. "I'd like you to meet Nadia Winters. She'll be taking over household management." The woman who followed was not what Damian expected. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled into a simple braid and eyes that held their own geography of sorrow. She wore practical clothes, jeans, a cream sweater, worn boots, and carried a single leather suitcase. No pretense, no nervous energy seeking to impress. "Mrs. Winters," Damian acknowledged with a curt nod. "Ms. Winters," she corrected gently, extending her hand. Her grip was firm but brief. "And please, just Nadia." Something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't the usual careful tone people used around him, that walking on eggshells sympathy that made his skin crawl. She spoke plainly, meeting his gaze without flinching or offering platitudes. Gerald cleared his throat. "Nadia comes highly recommended. She's managed estates in Sonoma and Napa. She's also comfortable with minimal supervision and understands your need for privacy." "I live in the West Wing," Damian said flatly. "The East Wing is off limits. I take meals alone. I don't entertain guests. If you need me, leave a note in the study." "Are we clear?" Nadia simply nodded. "Perfectly clear. Gerald will show you to your quarters. The cottage behind the main house has been prepared." He turned back to the view, dismissing them both. But before they left, Nadia spoke once more. "Mr. Cross, I just want you to know, I'm not here to change anything. I'm simply here to help keep your home running. That's all." Damian glanced over his shoulder. There was no pity in her expression, no judgment. Just a quiet understanding that felt almost like recognition, as if she too knew what it meant to live in a house full of ghosts. After they left, he stood on the terrace until sunset stained the sky purple and gold. The colors Claire had loved best. For the first time in months, a small thought flickered through his mind. Maybe this housekeeper would last longer than 2 months. Maybe she'd understand that some silences were meant to be honored, not filled. What he didn't know yet was that Nadia Winters carried her own 3 years of grief, her own museum of memories, and that sometimes 2 broken people don't need to be fixed, they just need to be seen. The language of small gestures, Nadia's first week passed in near silence. She moved through the estate like a careful breeze, present but never intrusive. She learned Damian's patterns. He rose at dawn and walked the perimeter fence alone, returned for black coffee at 7, disappeared into his study until noon. He ate lunch on the terrace regardless of weather, then spent afternoons in the wine cellar, though he never drank. She cleaned the main rooms with quiet efficiency, careful never to disturb the East Wing. But she noticed things. The layer of dust on Claire's studio door, the wilted flowers in every vase throughout the house, dead blooms Damian couldn't bring himself to throw away because Claire had arranged them years ago. On her 8th day, Nadia made a decision. She cut fresh lavender from the garden and placed small bunches throughout the house, not replacing Claire's dried arrangements, but alongside them. She didn't mention it. She simply left them there, living proof that beauty could exist beside memory. Damien noticed immediately. He stood in the hallway, staring at the purple sprigs beside a 3-year-old rose arrangement. His jaw tightened. He should have been angry. Instead, he felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking but shifting, like ice beginning to thaw. That afternoon, he found a book on the study desk. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. A small note in elegant handwriting read, "Found this in the library. Thought you might appreciate it." Nothing more. No forced cheerfulness or therapeutic suggestions. He read it that night, the first book he'd finished in 3 years. The story of a butler who'd buried his feelings so deep they'd fossilized, it struck too close. When he finished the last page at 2 in the morning, he sat in the darkness and wept for the first time since the funeral. The next morning, he left a note in the kitchen. "Thank you for the book. The lavender is acceptable." Nadia smiled when she found it. Progress, she thought, came in whispers, not shouts. By the 3rd week, a strange rhythm had developed between them. Damien began taking his coffee on the terrace at the same time Nadia watered the garden. They didn't speak, but he watched her tend the roses Claire had planted, her movements gentle and respectful. She never cut them back too harshly or changed their arrangement. One evening, he heard piano music drifting through the house. Soft, melancholic, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. He followed the sound to the music room and found Nadia at the grand piano, eyes closed, fingers moving across the keys with practiced grace. "I didn't know we had a concert pianist on staff," he said from the doorway. Nadia's hands stilled. "I'm sorry. Gerald said I could use the piano. I should have asked." "Don't stop." The words surprised them both. "Please." She resumed playing, and Damien sank into a chair by the window. Claire had never played piano. She'd been all wild energy and paintbrushes, incapable of sitting still. This music felt like something entirely separate from his grief, a door to a different room in his heart. When Nadia finished, silence settled between them. But it was different now, comfortable. "My husband taught me," she said quietly, still facing the piano. "David, he was a music professor. Died 4 years ago. Brain aneurysm. One moment he was correcting my fingering on Beethoven, the next moment he was gone." Damien felt his throat tighten. "Claire died in a sailing accident. A storm came up faster than the weather service predicted. She was an experienced sailor. Should have made it back." He paused. "Except she didn't." "I'm sorry," Nadia said, and somehow those overused words sounded genuine. "Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back." "No," she agreed, turning to face him. "But it means we're not alone in knowing what it costs to keep living." Something in her eyes, a mirror of his own exhaustion, his own determination to wake up each day despite everything, made Damien nod slowly. For weeks, he'd assumed she was just another employee. Now he saw the truth. Nadia wasn't here to take care of his house. She was here because she understood that sometimes survival means finding a place where your grief is allowed to exist without explanation. "Play something else," he requested softly. She did. And for the first time in 3 years, Damien Cross felt something other than emptiness. He felt the dangerous, terrifying possibility of connection. Outside, the vineyard stretched toward the ocean, and the first stars emerged like promises the universe might still keep. The charity gala. "Absolutely not," Damien said, staring at his business partner across the desk. Thomas Brennan, who'd co-founded Cross Vineyards 2 decades ago, simply smiled. "You've been hiding for 3 years, Damien. The board is getting anxious. Clients are asking questions. One evening, one event. You don't even have to enjoy it. Why can't we host it at the winery in Napa like always? Because this year we're honoring Claire's memory. The Claire Cross Foundation for Ocean Conservation, remember? We're raising money for the cause she loved. It should be here, at the estate she built." Damien felt the familiar weight pressing on his chest. Claire had been passionate about protecting marine ecosystems, had even planned to start the foundation herself before the accident. Thomas had kept it alive in her absence, but Damien had never attended a single event. Fine, he finally conceded. But I'm not giving a speech. Deal. We'll keep it simple. Wine tasting, dinner, silent auction. Nadia can coordinate with the event staff. At the mention of her name, Damien felt a strange flutter. Over the past 6 weeks, Nadia had become more than just the housekeeper. They shared evening piano sessions. She left him books, and he left her notes with his thoughts. They'd started taking morning coffee together on the terrace, conversations growing from polite observations to genuine exchanges about art, music, and the complicated mathematics of grief. He hadn't told anyone. Not Thomas, not Gerald, not even himself, really. But something was shifting, and it terrified him. The night of the gala arrived with unseasonable warmth. The estate glowed with string lights wound through the vineyard rows. Long tables dressed in white linen filled the lawn. A jazz quartet played near the fountain. Over 200 guests mingled in their finest attire. Tech moguls from San Francisco, wine collectors from across the state, environmentalists Claire had worked with. Damien stood on the terrace in his tailored suit, feeling like an imposter in his own home. Thomas handled the hosting duties while Damien nursed a single glass of wine and counted the minutes until he could escape. Then he saw her. Nadia emerged from the house in a simple navy dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders for the first time since he'd known her. She wasn't dressed like staff. Gerald had insisted she attend as a guest since she'd worked so hard on the preparations. She looked uncomfortable with the attention, staying near the edges of the crowd, a glass of white wine clutched in both hands. Beautiful evening, isn't it? Marcus Bellamy appeared at Damien's elbow. The art dealer was a regular at these events, charming and persistent in his networking. It's tolerable, Damien muttered. I don't believe I've met that lovely woman near the fountain. Is she new to the wine business? Damien followed his gaze to Nadia. She manages my household? Ah, well, she has excellent taste. We were discussing Rothko earlier. Quite insightful. Marcus set down his glass. If you'll excuse me? Damien watched, frozen, as Marcus approached Nadia with his practiced smile. She laughed at something he said, a genuine sound that Damien had only heard a handful of times. Then Marcus extended his hand, gesturing toward the small dance floor where several couples swayed to the music. Nadia hesitated, glancing toward the house as if seeking an escape route. But Marcus was persistent, and finally she accepted, setting down her wine glass. Damien's chest constricted. He watched Marcus's hand rest on the small of her back, watched them move together to the gentle rhythm, watched Nadia smile shyly as Marcus said something that made her duck her head. The wine glass in Damien's hand trembled. This wasn't anger. This was something worse, jealousy, raw and unexpected. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't upset that she was dancing. He was terrified that someone else might see what he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Nadia Winters had become essential to him. Her quiet presence, her understanding, the way she existed in his grief without trying to cure it. She'd slipped past every defense he'd built. And now, watching her in another man's arms, he understood with devastating clarity that his heart wasn't as dead as he'd believed. When the song ended, Nadia excused herself and disappeared toward the garden path that led to the cliffs. Damien didn't think. He simply followed. Confronting the past, he found her standing at the cliff's edge, where the garden path opened to a breathtaking view of the Pacific. The moon painted a silver road across the dark water, and the sound of waves crashing against rocks below filled the silence the music couldn't reach. Running away from your admirer? Damien asked, approaching slowly. Nadia turned, surprise flickering across her face. I needed air. Too many people asking too many questions. She paused. You're supposed to be hosting. Thomas is handling it. I was never good at these things, even before. He let the sentence die, standing beside her at the railing. Even when Claire was alive. They stood in silence for a long moment, the ocean breathing its ancient rhythm below them. "He seems nice," Damien finally said, hating how the words tasted. "Marcus? He's successful, cultured, probably doesn't spend his days brooding in a study." Nadia turned to look at him, confusion in her eyes. "Is that what you think I want?" "I don't know what you want. I don't know anything anymore." He gripped the railing. "But I know I watched you dance with him and felt something I thought I'd never feel again. And it scared the hell out of me." Damien. "I thought my heart was buried with Claire," he continued, the words rushing out now like a dam breaking. "I thought I'd used up my lifetime's worth of love. That I didn't deserve more. That wanting more would be a betrayal of everything she was." He finally turned to face her fully. "But you, God, Nadia, you've made it beat again. And I don't know what to do with that." Nadia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her hand came up to cover her mouth, and for a terrible moment, Damien thought he'd ruined everything. Confessed too much, too soon, to someone who saw him only as an employer or perhaps a friend. "I thought I'd forgotten what love feels like," she whispered. "After David died, I went numb. I took this job because I needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere I could exist without pretending to be healed. I wasn't looking for anything except a place to hide." She wiped at her eyes. "But these past weeks, hearing you laugh at something I said, finding your notes about the books I leave you, playing piano while you listen, Damien, you've made me want to feel again." "Then why does this feel so impossible?" His voice cracked. "Because we're both terrified," she said simply. "Terrified of dishonoring them. Terrified of losing someone again. Terrified that our grief is the only thing holding their memory alive." Damien reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd deliberately touched her. Her fingers were cold from the ocean breeze, and they trembled slightly in his palm. "I need to do something," he said. "I should have done it a long time ago." The next morning, Damien drove to the cemetery for the first time in over a year. He stood before Claire's headstone, elegant marble with a carved sailing ship, and felt the familiar weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice rough. "Sorry I stopped visiting. Sorry I turned the house into a shrine. Sorry I've been so angry at you for leaving." He knelt down, touching the cool stone. "But I think you'd be angry at me, too. For stopping. For giving up on everything that isn't grief." The wind moved through the cypress trees, and Damien could almost hear Claire's voice. "You're being dramatic again. Stop talking to my headstone and go live, you idiot." She'd always been practical, even about impossible things. "There's someone," he continued. "Her name is Nadia. She's kind, and she's broken, and she understands. And I think I'm falling in love with her. Is that okay? Can I do that and still love you?" The stone offered no answers, but somehow the silence felt less oppressive than it had in years. Damien stayed until the sun climbed high, talking to Claire about everything: the vineyard, the foundation, his fears, his hopes. When he finally stood to leave, he felt lighter, not healed, but no longer drowning. Meanwhile, Nadia sat in her cottage, reading a letter she'd kept in her nightstand for 4 years. David's handwriting, shaky from the medications but still distinctly. His, "My darling Nadia, if you're reading this, then I didn't beat this thing after all. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the pain you're feeling, sorry for all the music we won't make together, sorry for every tomorrow I'm stealing from you. But here's what I need you to know. Love isn't finite. Your heart is vast enough for everything, for grief and joy, for me and for whoever comes after. Don't you dare waste your beautiful life being loyal to my memory. Be loyal to your own happiness instead. Promise me you'll live fully, love again, and play Chopin at least once a week. All my love, always, David." Nadia folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. But for the first time, they weren't only tears of sorrow. They were permission, release, a blessing she'd been too afraid to accept until now. That evening, when Damien returned from the cemetery, he found Nadia waiting on the terrace with 2 glasses of wine. "To remembering," she said, raising her glass. "To living," he added. They drank as the sun set over the vineyard, 2 people who'd survived the unsurvivable, finally ready to see what came next. The first bloom of spring 6, months later, the estate had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The oppressive silence had lifted, replaced by the sounds of life. Nadia's piano drifting through open windows, Damien's laughter during dinner, the voices of the small staff they'd hired to help run a new venture. The Clare Cross Memorial Garden opened on the first day of spring. Damien and Nadia had spent the winter planning it, a section of the vineyard transformed into a public space where people who'd lost loved ones could come to remember, reflect, and heal. Stone benches sat among native plants and winding paths. A central fountain featured a bronze sculpture of waves donated by Marcus Bellamy, who'd become a friend and supporter of the project. Plaques throughout the garden bore names of the dead, each one sponsored by families seeking a beautiful place to honor their grief. Claire's plaque stood at the entrance, but it was joined by hundreds of others, including one for David Winters near the piano-shaped flower bed where forget-me-nots bloomed in shades of blue. "I never thought I'd want to share this place," Damien said, standing with Nadia at the garden's opening ceremony. Over 300 people had come for the dedication, including environmental scientists who'd worked with Claire and music students who'd studied under David. "Grief shouldn't be private property," Nadia replied, squeezing his hand. "It's the one thing that connects all of us." Thomas gave a moving speech about Claire's legacy. A marine biologist talked about the Foundation's recent success protecting coastal habitats. Then Nadia played a piece she'd composed herself, something that wove together sorrow and hope in equal measure. When the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Damien and Nadia walked to a quiet corner of the garden where a young oak tree waited to be planted. It was a tradition they'd decided on. Every year, on the anniversary of the garden's opening, they'd plant a new tree. "Growth built on remembrance. Ready?" Damien asked, picking up a shovel. Together they dug, their movements synchronized from months of working side by side. When the hole was deep enough, they carefully lowered the tree into place and began filling in the earth. "You know," Nadia said, patting soil around the base, "David used to say that oak trees live for hundreds of years, that they're witnesses to everything, wars, love stories, the rise and fall of entire civilizations." Claire said something similar about the ocean, that it remembers everything that's ever touched it. Damien stepped back, surveying their work. "Maybe that's what we're doing here. Creating witnesses, making sure nothing is forgotten, but also making space for new things," Nadia added. She turned to him, dirt smudged on her cheek, her eyes bright. "New growth, new love, new memories that don't erase the old ones but exist alongside them." Damien pulled her close, no longer afraid of what this meant or what anyone would think. They'd been careful at first, keeping their relationship private while they figured out what it was. But now, standing in this garden they'd built together, he felt no shame, only gratitude that life had given him a second chance he never thought he'd deserve. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. "Properly. Not as my housekeeper, but as my partner. Turn that cottage into a music studio or a library or whatever you want. But live with me in the main house. Build a life with me." Nadia's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "The East Wing. I opened it last month, while you were visiting your sister." He smiled at her surprise. "Packed up most of Claire's things, donated what made sense, kept what mattered. It's time, past time. I want to fill that house with new memories. With us." "Yes," Nadia breathed, laughing through tears. "Yes, absolutely, yes." They kissed beneath the young oak tree, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, surrounded by a garden full of names and stories and proof that loss, while permanent, doesn't have to be the end of everything. That evening, as they walked back toward the estate hand in hand, Damien looked up at the house that had been his prison for so long. Now it looked different. Not because anything physical had changed, but because he'd finally learned what Nadia had understood all along. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room in your heart for both grief and joy, for both past and future, for the people you've lost and the people you've found. The vineyard stretched out around them, vines heavy with new growth. In a few months, they'd harvest grapes for a vintage that would age in barrels and emerge years later as something transformed, still containing everything it had been, but also becoming something entirely new, just like them. As they reached the terrace, Nadia paused. "You know what I want to do?" "What?" "Paint something. A new portrait for that wall where Claire's used to hang. Not to replace her. Her paintings should go in the gallery we're building for the foundation. But to mark this moment. Us. Here. Now." Damien thought about it. About the house full of ghosts finally making room for the living. "I'd like that. Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible artist." "Good thing I'm not," Nadia grinned. "David may have taught me piano, but my mother taught me to paint. I think between the two of them, they'd approve of this." That night, while Nadia sketched preliminary ideas and Damien read beside her in comfortable silence, a storm rolled in from the ocean, the kind Claire had loved, dramatic and alive. But this time, Damien didn't close the windows or hide from the sound. He opened them wider, letting the wind carry the scent of rain and salt into every room. Outside, in the memorial garden, the young oak tree bent but didn't break, its roots already beginning to dig deep into the earth. It would grow slowly, year by year, until someday it would be strong enough to shelter whoever came seeking comfort beneath its branches. And on that tree's trunk, a small brass plaque read, "For those we've loved and lost, and for those we've yet to find, may we have the courage to do both." It was, they both agreed, the truest thing either of them knew. The end.